The soul or the astral body. Through subtler vibrations of the elements, through the electric and the magnetic fluid of their polarity, the main proper, the soul has proceeded from the akasa principle or the finer etheric vibrations. In the same way as the elements are functioning in the material body, the soul or the so-called astral body will behave. The four-pole magnet, with its specific qualities, connects or amalgamates the soul with the body. This amalgamation takes place with analogy to the body by the electromagnetic influence of the elements. We, the adepts, call the astral matrix or life this active behavior of the elements or the so-called electromagnetic fluid of the soul. This astral matrix or the so-called electromagnetic fluid of the soul is not identical with the occultist aura I shall speak of later. The astral matrix, or the electromagnetic fluid, is the connecting link between the body and the soul. The fiery principle causes in the soul what is constructive. The principle of water causes the animating. The principle of air is the balancing, and the earth principle causes what is thriving, compound, and preserving in the soul. The astral body is performing exactly the same functions as the material body. Man has been fitted with the five senses corresponding to the five elements, of which the astral body or the soul, with the help of the bodily senses, makes use to receive perceptions of the physical world. Our immortal spirit realizes this receiving and operating of the five senses through the astral and the material body. What this spirit is immortal will be explained in a later chapter. Without any activity of the spirit in the soul, the astral body would be without life and dissolve itself into its components, as the spirit would not be able to operate without the intervention of the soul. The astral body is the seat of all the qualities of the immortal spirit has. According to its development and maturity, spirit has a different electric or magnetic fluid vibration, which becomes outwardly patent in soul in the four temperaments. In accordance with the predominant elements, we distinguish the choleric, the sanguine, the melancholic, and the phlegmatic temper. The choleric temper is due to the element of air. The sanguine temper is due to the element of air. The melancholic temper is born from the water element, and the phlegmatic one is ascribed to the earthly element. The strength and vibration of the retrospective element corresponds in the various properties to the strength, vigor, and expansion of the respective fluid vibrations. Each of these four elements, which determine man's temper in the active form, owns the good properties and, in its passive form, the contrary or bad qualities. It would be too prolix to inform here about the effects of the elements, and it is better for the incipient adept to find out himself further effects by his own meditation. This manner also has a very special reason on the path to initiation. Here I shall a few examples only. The choleric temper, in its active polarity, has the following good qualities: activity, enthusiasm, eagerness, resolution, courage, productivity, etc. In the negative form, these qualities are gluttony, jealousy, passion, irritability, intemperance, bent to destruction, etc. The sanguine temper, in its active form, shows capacity of penetrating, diligence, joy, adroitness, kindness, clearness, lack of grief, cheerfulness, optimism, eagerness, independence, familiarity, etc. In the negative form, continual feeding or being affronted, contempt, propensity to gossiping, lack of endurance, slyness, gorliness, dishonesty, fickleness, etc. The melancholic temper in its active form, respectively, modesty, compassion, devotion, seriousness, docility, fever, cordiality, comprehension, meditation, calmness, quick to give one's confidence, forgiveness, tenderness, and so on. In the negative form, indifference, depression, apathy, shyness, laziness, etc. The phlegmatic temper in its active form, respectively, reputation, endurance, consideration, resolution, firmness, seriousness, scrupulousness, thoroughness, concentration, sobriety, punctuality, perseverance, objectivity, infallibility, responsibility, reliability, circumspection, resistance, self-assurance, and so on. In the negative form, indispidity, unscrupulousness, manthropy, dullness, tiredness, laziness, unreliability, and so on. The qualities of the temperaments, according to the predominant quality, form the basis of the human character. The intensity of these qualities, shown outwardly, depends on the polarity, the electric or the magnetic fluid. The total influence of the effects of the temperaments results in an emanation professionally called aura. Therefore, this kind of aura is not to be compared with the astral matrix, because between these two conceptions there is a thumping difference. The astral matrix is connecting substance between the body and soul, whilst the aura is the emanation of the action of the elements and the various qualities having its origin either in the active or in the passive form. This emanation in the whole soul produces a certain vibration corresponding to a certain color. On the grounds of this color, the adept can exactly recognize his own aura of that or another being with the astral eyes. Backed by this aura, the seer can establish not only a man's basic character, but he can also perceive the action of the polarity of the soul's vibration and influence it eventually. I shall speak of these problems in a more detailed way in a separate chapter relating to the introspection. Hence, a man's temperament influences his character, and both together, in their effect as a total result, are creating the emanation of the soul or the aura. This is also the reason for the high depths or saints always being represented with the images of a halo identical to the aura we have described. Besides the character, the temperament, and the activity of the electromagnetic fluid, the astral body still has two centers in the brain, the cerebrum being the seat of the normal consciousness, while in the cerebellum there is the opposite to the normal consciousness, but the subconsciousness. As to their functions, see the chapter concerning the spirit. As it has been said before, according to the elements, the soul is divided in exactly the same way as the body. The psychic functions, powers, and properties also have their seat respectively in the soul in certain centers analogous to all the elements, which the Indian philosophy designates as chakras. The awakening of these chakras is named Kundalini Yoga in the Indian doctrine. I desist, however, from a comment on these lotuses or centers because the student interested in this problem will find all the necessary enlightenment in the respective literature. I will touch on it only slightly and say that the lowest center is the so-called Maldura or the earth center, having its seat in the lowest part of the soul. The next center is that of the water, with its seat in the region of the sexual organs and designated the Indian terminology as the Swasthania. The center of fire, as the center of soul, is in the umbilical region and is named the Manpura. The center of air, as compensatory element, is in the region of the heart and it is termed the Anthara. The center of the aether, or the principle of the akasa, is found in the region of the neck and is named Visuddha. Another center, that of volation and intellect, is between the eyebrows and is called dhyana. As the supreme and most divine center is regarded as the thousand-petaled lotus, named Sahasrara, from where derive and are influenced all the other powers of the centers. Beginning at the top, from the supreme center, along the neck down to the lowest center, like a channel runs the so-called Susuma, or the Akasa principle, already known to us liable for the connection and control of the entire centers. Later on, I shall come back to the problem of the evocation of the snake power and the single centers. In describing the soul, the principal task will be to establish the connection of the elements with their positive and negative polarities in the soul, and give a neat idea of it. One will see that the body, as well as the soul, with their effects, are alive and working, that their preservation and destruction are subject to the immutable laws of the four-pole magnet, the secret of the tetragrammaton, and governed by them. If he who is to be initiated will attentively meditate about it, he will win a clear idea not only of the bodily functions, but also those of the soul, and come to a sound notion of the mutual interaction according to the original laws. Number 12, the astral plane. The astral plane, often designated as the fourth dimension, has not been created out of the four elements, but it is the destiny degree of the Akasha principle. Consequently, of all that up to now, the material world occult, occurred, it is actually occurring and will occur, and has its origin, regulation, and existence. As said before, Akasha in its most subtle form is the aether, the well known to all of us, in which, amongst other vibrations, electric as well as magnetic ones are perpetuated. Consequently, this vibration sphere is the origin of light, sound, color, rhythm, and life in all things created. As Akasa is the origin of all existing things, all that ever was produced and being produced and will be produced in the future is reflected in it. Therefore, in the astral plane, there is to be seen an emanation of the eternal, having neither a beginning nor an end, as it is timeless and spaceless. The adept who sees his way about this plane may find everything here, no matter if the point in question be in the past, the present, or the future. How far this perception will reach depends on the degree of his perfection. Occultists and spiritualists and most of the religions name the astral plane the world beyond. However, the adept knows very well that there is no such thing as hints and beyond, and feels no fear of death, which concept is quite strange to him. If by the disintegrating work of the elements, or a sudden breakup, the astral matrix, which is connecting matter between grossly material body and the astral body, has got loose, then will happen what we commonly call death, which, however, in reality is nothing else but a passage from the terrestrial world to the astral world. Backed up by this law, the adept knows no fear of death, being convinced that he will not approach uncertainty. Through his control of the elements, besides many other things, he can also achieve a slackening of the astral matrix, which will result in a spontaneous separation of the astral body from the mortal frame. Thus, he will be able to visit the remotest regions, transfer himself into various planes, and in the form of his astral body. This is a positive explanation of so many tales in which saints have been seen at the same time in different places and even have been working there. The astral plane has various kinds of inhabitants. First of all, there are the deceased ones who, having left earth, are abiding in the corresponding destiny degree according to their spiritual maturity, which is designated by various religions as heaven or hell. The adepts seeing only symbols therein, the nobler, purer, and the more perfect an entity happens to be, the all purer and finer will be the destiny degree of the inhabited astral plane. Little by little, the astral body is dissolving, until it has become suitable to the degree of vibrations of the respective step of the astral level, or identical with it. As you see, this identification depends on the maturity and the spiritual perfection of the entity concerned achieved on this earth. Besides, the astral plane is inhabited by many other beings, of which I am mentioning only some species here. There are the so-called elementaries, entities with one or only very few qualities. According to the dominant vibrations of the element, they are living on the similar vibrations proper to man and transmitted him by and to the astral plane. Among them there are some which have already reached a certain degree of intelligence, and some magicians are using these low-powered beings for their selfish purposes. Another kind of being is the larvae, which have been brought into life consciously or unconsciously by intense sensorial thinking. Through the astral matrix, they are not real beings but only forms thriving on the passions of the animal world, on the lowest step of the astral level. Their instinct of self-preservation carries them into the sphere of those men whose passions are responsive to them. They will try, directly or indirectly, to raise and kindle the passions sublimating in man. If these forms are succeeding in seducing men to give in to their subtle passion, they are feeding and thriving on the emanation of this passion produced in man. Man, laden with many passions, will attract a host of such larvae in the lowest sphere of his astral plane. A great fight takes place, and in the problem of magic, this fact plays an important role. More about it is to be founding in the chapter dealing with introspection. There are also other elementaries and larvae which can be produced in the artificial magic way. As for further details, see the practical part of this book. Another part of being the adept often has to deal with in the astral plane, but must not be overlooked, namely the beings of the four pure elements. In the element of fire, their name is salamander. In the air element, they are the sylphs. In the water element, they are called mermaids or undines, and in the element of the earth, they are the gnomes or the goblins. These beings represent, as it were, the connection between the astral plane and the earthly elements. How to establish the connection with these beings, how to control them, what can be achieved with their help, all will be reserved to the practical part of the present book, to which I shall dedicate the special chapter, Magic of the Elements. Furthermore, there is a host of other beings such as satyrs, wood maidens, water goblins, etc., who could be specified. Even if all this sounds like a fairy tale, on the astral plane, the previously described beings are the very same realities as all the other earthly beings. The adept's clairvoyant eyes can see all of them if he desires so, and is able to establish the connection with them, so excluding any doubt of the existence of these beings right from the beginning. That is why the adept has to first and learn to examine before being able to judge. Number 13, the spirit. It has been said before that the spirit of man has been created in the image of God and consists of body, soul, and spirit. The preceding chapters have made it evident that the body and soul serve only as a veil or garment for the spirit. The spirit is the immortal part of the image of God. It is not easy to define something divine, immortal, irreperishable, and to put it into the correct terms, but here, as well as with many other problems, the key of the four-pole magnet will be a great help for us. From the supreme prototype Akasa, the original source of all beings, has produced the spirit with a spiritual ego, with the four specific elemental qualities proper to the immortal spirit which has created in God's image. The fiery principle, the impulsive part, means the will or volition. The airy principle shows up in the intellect or the mind. The watery principle, respectively, in the life and feeling. And the earthly principle is representing the union of all the three elements in the consciousness of the ego. All the other qualities of the spirit are based upon these four original principles. The typical part of the fifth, say the etheric principle, akasa, manifests itself in the highest aspect, in the faith, and in the lowest form. In the instinct of the self-preservation, each of these mentioned four elemental principles has many other aspects corresponding to the law of analogy of the polarity or of the positive and negative elements. All of them together form the ego or the spirit. For this reason, we can make the fiery principle responsible for strength, power, and passion, memory, power of discrimination and judgment, are subscribed to the air principle. Conscious and intuition are to the principle of water. Egotism and instincts of self-preservation and propagation to the earthly part of the spirit. It would be too long to quote all of the properties of the spirit with regard to the elements. The adept can enlarge these qualities by serious studies and deep meditation with respect to the analogous laws of the four-pole magnet. This happens to be a very mysterious work which never ought to be neglected because it would lead to great success and secure results. These three chapters relating to body, soul, and spirit have represented man in his most perfect form. By now, the disciple ought to have realized how very important it is to know one's own microcosm for the initiation, and especially for the magic and the mystic practice. As a matter of fact, for the whole of the secrets, most of the authors, from sheer ignorance or for the other cognate reasons, have omitted this extremely important part of their foundation. Number 14, the mental plane. As the body has its earthly plane, and the astral body or the soul owns the astral plane, the spirit too has its own plane, the so-called mental plane or mental sphere. This is the mental sphere with all its virtues. Both these spheres, the material as well as the astral one, have been born from the akasa or the original principle of the respective sphere. Through the four elements, and also the mental sphere is built upon the same foundation, and therefore likewise a product of the Akasa principle of the spirit. Similar to the spirit developing in a four-pole magnet by corresponding work and showing an electromagnetic fluid analogous to the astral body on an account of the effect of the elements as a secondary phenomenon of the polarity on all of the outside of the mental body develops in the mental or spiritual sphere. Just in the same way as the astral body through the electromagnetic fluid of the astral world forms an astral matrix, the so-called astral odd, the electromagnetic fluid of the mental world forms a mental matrix linking the mental body to the astral body. This mental matrix, or the mental odd, the so-called mental substance, is the subtlest form of the akasa, which controls and preserves the spiritual activity in the astral body. At the same time, this mental substance is electromagnetic and is regarded as lesser of the ideas to the conscience of the spirit, from where it is put up into activity through the astral and the roughly material body. So this mental matrix, or the mental odd, with its double pole fluid, is the subtlest substance we can imagine in the human body. Simultaneously, the mental sphere in the sphere of thoughts, which have their origin in the world of ideas, consequently in the spiritual akasha, each thought is preceded by a basic idea, which, according to its property, accepts a definite form and arrives in the consciousness of the ego through the etheric principle. Consequently, the mental matrix as expression of thought in the shape of a plastic picture. Therefore, man himself is not the founder of thoughts, but the origin of each thought is to be sought in the supreme akasa sphere, or the mental plane. Man's spirit, as it were, is the receiver of the antenna of thoughts from the world of ideas. According to the situation in which man happens to be, the world of ideas being all in now, eat all in all, each new idea, new invention in short, all man believes to have created by himself, has been brought to this world of ideas. This production of new ideas depends on the maturity and attitude of the spirit. Each thought involves an absolutely pure element, especially if the thought implies abstract ideas. If the thought is based on several combinations of the ideal world, different elements and effective in their form as well as in their mutual emanation. Only abstract ideas have pure elements and pure polar emanations, as they descend directly from the causal world of an idea. From this cognition, we may draw the conclusion that there are pure electric, pure magnetic, indifferent, and neutral ideas from the standpoint of their effect. According to the idea, each thought in the mental sphere has its own form, color, and vibration. Through the tetrapolar magnet of the spirit, the thought arrives at the consciousness from where it is forwarded to the realization. Each thing created in the material world consequently has its cause in the ideal world through the thought and the spiritual consciousness, as it is reflected therein. If the point in question is not exactly an abstract idea, several forms of ideas can be expressed. Such thoughts are electric or magnetic, electromagnetic, according to the elementary property of the idea. The material plane is bound to time and space. The astral plane, sphere, or the perishable or mutable spirit, is bound to space, the mental plane being timeless and spaceless. The very same thing happens with all the mental properties. The reception of a thought in the mental body, through the link of the astral and mental matrix, bound to space and in time the total form, needs a certain amount of time to become fully conscious of this thought. According to the mental maturity, the train of thoughts is different in each individual. The more advanced, the more cultured the man is, the faster thoughts will develop into the mind. Likewise, as the astral plane is inhabited, so too is the mental plane. Besides the ideal forms, there are principally the deceased ones, whose astral bodies have been dissolved by the elements in the course of their ripening, and allotted according to the degree of perfection to the regions corresponding to their mental sphere. Besides the mental sphere is the sphere of the so-called elementals, being created consciously or unconsciously by man as a result of repeated and intense thinking. An elemental being is not yet so condensed to form or to assume any astral shape for itself. Its influence is therefore limited to the mental sphere. The difference between an ideal form and an elemental lies in the fact that the ideal form is based on one or several ideas. On the other hand, the elemental is equipped with a certain quantity of consciousness and therefore with the instinct of preservation, but otherwise it is not much distinguished from the other mental living beings, and it can even take the same shape as the ideal form. The adept often resorts to these elemental beings. The problem of how to create such an elemental, how to preserve it, and how to utilize it for certain purposes will be approached in the practical section of this book. There would still be quite a lot to be said about the particular specific properties of some beings, but all that we have pointed out previously should be sufficient to stimulate the work and contribute to a session enlightenment about the mental plane. Number 15, truth. Let us now leave the microcosm, I mean to say man, with his earthly, astral, and mental bodies, and turn to other problems, which also are imminent to be solved by the incipient adept. First of all, there is the problem of truth. A great many philosophers have already paid serious attention to this problem, and we also will have to approach this task. We shall deal here only with such kinds of truth about which we must be thoroughly informed. Truth depends on the insight of each individual, and as we cannot all have the same insight or perception, it is impossible to generalize the problem of truth. Therefore, from the standpoint and in conformity with the degree of his maturity, each one will have his own truth, providing he sees it quite honestly. Only he who knows and masters the absolute laws of the microcosm and the macrocosm is entitled to speak of an absolute truth. Certain aspects of the absolute truth will be surely acknowledged by everyone. Nobody, indeed, will doubt that there is life, volition, memory, and intellect, and will refrain from arguing about these facts. No sincere adept will impose his truth to anyone who is not yet ripe for it. The person concerned would do nothing else but regard it again from his own standpoint. Therefore, it would be useless to argue with non-professionals on higher kinds of truth, except people eager to search the heights of truth and beginning to ripen for it. Anything else would be a profanation, and from the magical point of view, absolutely incorrect. At this point, all of us will have to remember the words of the great master of Christianity: "Cast not your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet." To the truth belongs also the capacity of the correctly differentiating among knowledge and wisdom.
Knowledge depends in all domains of the human existence on the maturity, the receptivity, and the understanding of the mind, and the memory, without regard to whether or not we have been able to enrich our knowledge by reading, transmitting other experiences. There is a wide difference between knowledge and wisdom, and it is much easier to win knowledge than wisdom. Wisdom depends not in the least on knowledge, although both are all identical up to a certain degree. The source of wisdom is in God, that is to say, in the causal principle, the akasa, on all planes of the material, astral, and mental worlds. Therefore, wisdom does not depend on mind and memory, but on the maturity, purity, and purification of the individual personality. Wisdom could also be considered as a developmental stage of the ego. Therefore, insights are not passed on thought, the mind, but, and this particularly, thorough intuition or inspiration. The degree of wisdom is therefore determined by the state of development of the individual. This will not mean, of course, that we ought to neglect knowledge; on the contrary, knowledge and wisdom must go hand in hand. The adept will therefore endeavor to get on knowledge as well as in wisdom, for neither of the two must lag behind in the development. If knowledge and wisdom kept the same pace in development, the adept is enabled to grasp all the laws of the microcosm and the macrocosm, not only from the point of view of wisdom, but also from the intellectual side, that is, in a bipolar way, to perceive and utilize them for his own development. In all the planes we have already learned how to know one of the numerous laws. The first main key, the secret of the tetragrammaton, or the four-pole magnet, being a universal key. It can be used to solve all problems, all laws, all kinds of truth, in short. Everything provided that the adept knows how to use it properly. As time goes on and his development unfolds and he is advancing in hermetics, he will be acquainted with many more aspects of this key and be forced to accept it as an unchangeable law. He will no more wander in the darkness and uncertainty, for he will carry a torch in his hand, the light of which will penetrate the night of ignorance. This brief summary will suffice for the adept to instruct him how to deal with the problem of truth. Number 16. Religion. The incipient magician will confess his faith to a universal religion. He will find out that every religion has good points as well as bad ones. He will therefore keep the best of it for himself and ignore the weak points, which does not necessarily mean that he must profess a religion, but he shall express awe to each form of worship, for each religion has its proper principle of God, whether the point in question be Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, or any other kind of religion. Fundamentally, he may be faithful to his own religion, but he will not be satisfied with the official doctrines of his church and will try to penetrate deeper into God's workshop. And such is the purpose of our initiation. According to the universal laws, the magician will form his own point of view about the universe, which henceforth will be his true religion. He will state that, apart from the deficiencies, each defender of religion will endeavor to represent his religion as the best of all. Each religious truth is relative, and the comprehension of it depends on the maturity of the person concerned. Therefore, the adept does not interfere with anybody in this respect, nor will he try to sidetrack anyone from his truth, criticize him, to say nothing of condemning him. At the bottom of his heart, he may feel sorry for fanatics or atheists without showing it outwardly. Let everybody to hold on to what he believes and make him happy and content. Should everybody stick to this maxim, there would be neither hatred nor religious dissensions on this earth. There would be no reason for disputes, and all turns of mind could exist happily side by side. Quite a different thing is if a seeker, dissatisfied by materialism and doctrines, and longing for spiritual support, will ask advice and information of an adept. In such a case, the adept is obliged, in supply, the seeker with spiritual light and insight, according to his mental powers. Then the magician should spare neither time nor pains to communicate his spiritual treasures and lead the seeker to the light. Number 17. God. Since the remotest times, mankind has always believed in something beyond human understanding, something transcendental that he idolized no matter whether there was question of personified or unpersonified conceptions of God. Anything man was unable to understand or to comprehend was imputed to the powers above such as his intuitive virtue admitted them. In this way, all the deities of mankind, good and evil ones, demons, have been born. As time went on, gods and angels, demiurges, demons and ghosts have been worshipped irrespective of their ever having been alive in reality or their having existed only in the fancy. With the development of mankind, the idea of God was shrinking, especially at the time when the aid of the sciences phenomena were explained that previously were ascribed to the gods. A lot of books would have to be written if one wished to enter into details of the various ideas of God in the history of the nations. Let us approach the idea of God from a magician's standpoint. To the plain man, the idea of God serves as a support for his spirit just not to entangle himself in uncertainty or get out of his depth. Therefore, his God always remains something inconceivable, intangible, and incomprehensible to him. It is quite otherwise with the magician who knows his God in all aspects. He holds his God in all, as he knows himself to have been created in its image, consequently to be a part of God. He sees his lofty ideal, his first duty, and his sacred objective in the union with the Godhead, in becoming the God man. The rise to this sublime goal shall be described later on. The synthesis of this mystic union with God consists in developing the divine ideas, from the lowest up to the highest steps, in such a degree as to attain the union with the universal. Everyone is at liberty to abandon his individuality or to retrain it. Such genii usually return to earth entrusted with the definitive sacred task or mission. In this rise, the initiated magician is a mystic at the same time, only performing this union and giving up his individuality. He voluntarily enters his dissolution within this mystic wording, and it is called the mystic death. It is evident that the true initiation knows neither a mystic nor a magic path. There is only one initiation linking both conceptions, in opposition to most of the mystic and spiritual schools which are dealing with the very highest problems, through meditation or other spiritual exercises, without having gone through the first steps at first. This would be very similar to somebody starting with the university studies without having gone through the elementary classes first. The result of such a one-sided training in some cases are disastrous, sometimes even drastic, according to the individual talents. Generally, the error is to be found in the fact that most of the matter comes from the Orient, where the material, as well as the astral world, is regarded as Maya, or the illusion, and consequently little attention is paid to it. It is impossible to point out the details, for this would overstep the frame of this book. Sticking to a carefully planned, step-by-step development, there will be neither a mishap nor failure nor bad consequences, for the simple reason that ripening takes place slowly but surely. It is quite an individual matter whether the adept will choose as his idea of God Christ, Buddha, Brahma, Allah, or someone else. It all depends on the idea in the initiation. The pure mystic wishes to approach his God only in the all-embracing love. The yogi, too, walks towards one single aspect of God. The Black Eye Yogi keeps to the road of love and the devotion. The Raha and the Hatha Yogi choose the path of self-control or volition, and the Jnana Yogi will follow that of wisdom and cognition. Now let us regard the idea of God from the magic standpoint. According to the four elements, the so-called tetragrammaton, the unspeakable, the supreme, the fiery principle involves the almightiness and the omnipotence. The airy principle owns the wisdom, purity, and clarity, from which aspect proceeds the universal lawfulness, love, and ethereal life are attributed to the watery principle, the omnipresence, immortality, and consequently eternity belonging to the earthly principle. These four aspects together represent the supreme Godhead. Let us tread upon this path to the supreme Godhead practically and step by step, beginning from the lowest sphere to arrive at the true realization of God in ourselves. Let us praise the happy man who will reach this still in his earthly existence. Let us banish fear for the pains for all of us which will reach this goal.
18. Aestheticism. From the remotest of times, all religious sects, turns of mind, and trading systems have regarded asceticism as a very important problem. Various systems of the Orient turned asceticism into fanaticism, causing great damage by exaggeration and wild excuses that were unnatural and unlawful. The mortification of the flesh, generally speaking, is just as one-sided as developing one part of the body only, neglecting all other parts. If aestheticism serves the human body, say in the pattern of a diet, to get rid of a slag and other impurities, or to save the body from illness and to compensate disharmonies, then aesthetic measures may be reasonably employed, but be aware of any exaggeration. Somebody doing hard physical work would indeed be very foolish to deprive the body of substances absolutely necessary for its preservation, just because he is privately interested in yoga or mysticism. Such extremes would doubtlessly end up with serious and dangerous injuries to the health. Vegetarianism is not implicitly important for the mental progress or the intellectual development, unless it is supposed to be a remedy to clean the body from a slag. A temporary abstinence from meat or animal food is indicated only for very specific magic operations as a sort of a preparation, and even then only for a certain period. All this is to be considered with respect to sexual life. The idea that by eating the meat of an animal, the animal powers or facilities could be conveyed to oneself is nonsense and originates in mental ignorance of the perfect and genuine primitive law. The magician does not pay any attention to such a misconception. In the interest of his mago-mystic development, the magician must be moderate in eating and drinking, and observe a reasonable mode of life. It is impossible to fix precise rules or prescriptions, the magic way of life being quite individual. Each and all must know best what agrees or disagrees with them. It is a sacred duty to keep the balance everywhere. There are three kinds of asceticism: intellectual or mental asceticism, psychic or astral asceticism, physical or material asceticism. The first kind has to do with the discipline of thoughts. The second kind is engaged in enabling the soul through the control of passions and instincts, and the third kind is concerned with harmonizing the body through a moderate and natural way of life. Without these three kinds of aestheticism, which must be developed at the same time and parallel to each other, a correct magical rise is unthinkable. To avoid any one-sided development, no one of three kinds may be neglected, and none of them may prevail. Further information about how to accomplish this task will be given in the practical training course of this book. Before bringing the theoretical part to an end, which has illustrated the principles, I advise everybody that this part should not only be read, but must become the mental possession of the concerned person by means of intense reflection and meditation. He is going to be a magician, will recognize that the life is dependent on the work of the elements in the various planes and spheres. It is to be seen in great and in small things, in the microcosm as well as the macrocosm,
temporarily and eternally, everywhere there are powers and actions. Starting from this point of cognition, you will find that there is no death at all, the true sense of the word, but everything goes on living, transmuting, and becoming perfect according to the primitive laws. Therefore, the magician is not afraid of death, for he believes the physical death to be only the transition to a subtler sphere, the astral plane, and from there to the spiritual level, and so on. Consequently, he will not believe in heaven nor in hell. The priests of the various religions stick to these fancies solely to keep their kinds to the point. Their moralizing serves only to provoke fear for the hell of the purgatory and to promise heaven to morally good people. Average people, as far as they are religiously inclined, are favorably influenced by such a point of view, for from fear of hell they will try to be good. But as for the magician, he sees the purpose of moral laws in ennobling the mind and the soul, for it is an ennobled soul that only the universal powers can do their work, especially if body, mind, and soul have been equally trained and developed.